People think powerful men are terrifying when they're angry. They've clearly never seen one become jealous. The grandfather clock in the Moretti mansion struck 1:17 a.m. just as the front doors opened and Vincent Moretti stepped inside carrying the kind of silence that made grown men lower their eyes. Rainwater dripped from the shoulders of his black wool coat onto the marble floor while two security men followed several feet behind him, careful not to speak first. Nobody ever spoke first around Vincent. Not unless they wanted their heartbeat living in their throat for the next hour. I stood near the kitchen entrance holding a clean dish towel against my chest, watching him cross the foyer beneath the chandelier light. Even after 11 months working inside that mansion, the sight of him still did something strange to the atmosphere around me. The air tightened. Like the whole house inhaled at once. 6'3". Dark tailored suit. Black gloves still covering his hands. Cold gray eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Vincent Moretti didn't walk into rooms. He took ownership of them. One of the guards moved quickly toward him. "Sir, the Chicago shipment issue has been handled." Vincent removed one glove finger by finger without looking at him. "Then why are you still talking?" The guard immediately went silent. I should have looked away. Every employee in that house had learned the rules. Don't stare. Don't ask questions. Don't linger near his office. But my eyes caught on something dark near the cuff of Vincent's white shirt. A stain. Not dramatic. Not shocking. Just enough to tell me he'd had another long night handling business nobody talked about out loud. He loosened his tie slightly as he walked past the dining room, exhaustion flickering across his face for half a second before disappearing again behind that expressionless mask. That was the thing about Vincent. Most people saw power first. I saw exhaustion. "Mr. Moretti." My own voice surprised me. Quiet. Careful. But enough to stop him mid-step. Every guard in the foyer looked at me like I just volunteered to jump off the roof. Vincent turned slowly toward me. Those pale gray eyes landed on my face. With the weight of a loaded question. "You're bleeding." The room went completely still. One of the security men actually lowered his head like he physically could not bear to witness what happened next. Vincent glanced down toward his wrist where a thin line of red had slipped beneath the edge of his cuff. Probably glass. Probably nothing serious. But for some reason, seeing it made my chest tighten anyway. His eyes returned to mine. "You should be asleep, Claire. You should probably clean that before it gets worse." For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then something almost unreadable crossed his face. Not anger. Not amusement. Something stranger. Like confusion. Like he wasn't used to people speaking to him without fear attached to every word. I stepped closer before my courage disappeared and held out the towel in my hand. "Here." One of the guards inhaled sharply beside us. Vincent stared at the towel first. Then at me. Rain tapped softly against the mansion windows while somewhere upstairs music played low through hidden speakers. Frank Sinatra. Old and smooth and haunting. Vincent finally removed the other glove slowly and took the towel from my hand without breaking eye contact. His fingers brushed mine for less than a second. Cold skin. Steady hands. Dangerous man. "You always talk to your employer this way?" he asked quietly. "Only when he's bleeding on imported Italian marble." A sound escaped one of the guards before he covered it with a cough. Vincent looked at me for another long moment. Then, unbelievably, the corner of his mouth moved slightly upward. Not a smile exactly. Vincent Moretti probably hadn't smiled properly in years. But it was enough to make my pulse stumble anyway. He glanced down at the towel in his hand before speaking again. "Go to sleep, Claire." I nodded once. "Good night, Mr. Moretti." I turned toward the kitchen, expecting the moment to end there. But halfway through the doorway, I felt his gaze still on me. Heavy. Focused. Watching. That was the first night Vincent Moretti looked at me like I was more than just the maid who cleaned his house. By the next morning, the entire mansion knew Vincent Moretti had almost smiled at me. Nobody said it directly, of course. People inside that house survived by pretending not to notice things. But I felt it in the stares from the kitchen staff. In the silence that followed me through the hallways. In the way Marco, the head of security, watched me during breakfast preparation like he was trying to understand whether I was brave or simply stupid. Probably both. The mansion looked different during daylight. Less dangerous. Sunlight poured through 30-foot windows and painted gold across the marble floors while the scent of espresso drifted through the kitchen. Somewhere upstairs, footsteps echoed softly. Expensive. Controlled. The sound of a man used to having everyone wait for him. I stood at the counter slicing strawberries for a breakfast tray I knew Vincent would barely touch. Black coffee. Fresh fruit. Dry toast. Every morning exactly the same. You should avoid speaking to him unless he speaks first, one of the older housekeepers whispered beside me while folding linen napkins. I was answering a medical concern. She looked horrified by my choice of words. Claire, honey, this is not a normal house. No. It definitely was not. I carried the breakfast tray upstairs at exactly 8:15 because Vincent hated delays almost as much as interruptions. The hallway outside his office felt colder than the rest of the mansion. Dark wood walls. Abstract paintings worth more than my student loans. Men in tailored suits speaking quietly into earpieces. One of them opened the office door for me without a word. Vincent stood near the massive windows overlooking Manhattan, phone pressed to his ear. Morning light cut sharply across the lines of his face, turning him into something carved from stone. His suit today was charcoal gray. Tie perfectly straight. Every inch of him looked composed except for the tension in his shoulders. Then cancel the meeting, he said coldly into the phone. I do not care how important Senator Reynolds thinks he is. He ended the call without waiting for a response. I set the tray carefully onto his desk. Your coffee. You remembered. His voice was quieter than usual this morning. I glanced toward the untouched towel folded near his desk chair. The same towel I had handed him last night. Freshly cleaned now. For some reason, seeing it there made my stomach tighten slightly. Most people enjoy coffee before threatening politicians. One of the guards near the door looked like he wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. Vincent slowly lifted his eyes toward me. Then something dangerous and unreadable flickered there before vanishing again. You think I am threatening him? I think the poor man probably needs antacids after your phone calls. Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that usually made people panic around him. But then I heard it. Soft. Low. A quiet sound almost hidden beneath his breath. A laugh. Vincent Moretti actually laughed. Tiny. Brief. Gone in less than 2 seconds. But the room froze anyway. Marco nearly dropped the tablet in his hands. I stared at Vincent because I genuinely thought I imagined it. His expression hardened immediately after, like he regretted letting the moment escape. You are becoming very comfortable here, Claire. Maybe the mansion is less scary in daylight. That is your first mistake. His eyes held mine for a second too long. My pulse stumbled again in that annoying way it had started doing around him lately. I reached for the empty water glass on his desk mostly to give my hands something to do. That was when I noticed the framed photograph turned slightly away from view near the corner of the desk. A woman with dark hair smiling beside a younger version of Vincent standing near a lake somewhere. He looked different in the picture. Lighter somehow. Human. Before I could stop myself, I asked quietly, who is she? The temperature in the room changed instantly. Vincent's entire expression closed off like a steel door slamming shut. Every guard went completely still. I realized too late I had crossed into territory nobody else dared approach. Vincent stepped closer slowly, his voice calm enough to become terrifying again. "That," he said softly, "is none of your business." There are two kinds of silence inside the Moretti mansion. The first kind feels expensive. Soft music drifting through hidden speakers. Rain against glass windows. The clink of crystal against marble. The second kind feels dangerous. I learned the difference the moment I asked about the woman in the photograph. Vincent stared at me for so long that my skin started to burn beneath his gaze. Not anger exactly. Something colder. Like I had accidentally touched a locked door inside him nobody else was allowed near. I lowered my eyes first. "Sorry," I said quietly, reaching for the empty tray. "I should not have asked." He said nothing. The silence stretched another few seconds before he finally stepped away toward the windows again. Dismissal. Relief loosened inside my chest as I picked up the tray and moved toward the office door. "Claire." I stopped immediately. His voice was calm again. Controlled. "Do not apologize for being curious." I turned slightly toward him. Most people here seem terrified of curiosity. One corner of his mouth moved faintly before disappearing. Most people here are smart. I should have left after that. Instead, I made the mistake of glancing back at him one more time. Morning sunlight wrapped around his silhouette while Manhattan spread endlessly beyond the glass behind him. Powerful men were supposed to look untouchable. Vincent looked lonely. That realization stayed with me all week. I noticed things after that. The way he skipped dinner whenever meetings ran late. The way he loosened his tie exactly once before midnight every night like it was the only moment he allowed himself to breathe. The way he always paused outside the library at 2 in the morning but never went inside. Small things. Human things. Dangerous things to notice about a man like him. Friday arrived wrapped in cold October rain. The mansion buzzed with unusual tension because Vincent was hosting some kind of private dinner upstairs with investors and politicians whose names I recognized from television. Security filled every hallway. Men in dark suits spoke into earpieces while expensive cars lined the circular driveway outside like a luxury car commercial. I spent most of the afternoon helping prepare the dining room. Candles. Crystal glasses. Imported flowers flown in from Italy. Everything perfect because Vincent Moretti did not tolerate imperfect things. By 6:30, my feet hurt and my head pounded from the smell of polish and expensive cologne lingering everywhere. I stood near the kitchen adjusting the sleeve of my black dress when Sophia, one of the younger maids, smiled at me knowingly. "You look pretty tonight." "I always look pretty," I replied automatically. She laughed softly. "No. Tonight you look nervous." Maybe I did. Maybe that was because tonight mattered. Not because of Vincent. Definitely not because of Vincent. I had spent 3 weeks talking to Daniel Harper online after matching through a dating app Sophia forced me to download. 31. Accountant. Divorced. Normal. Painfully normal. Which sounded wonderful after 11 months inside a mansion where people whispered before speaking. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. "Daniel, looking forward to tonight." I smiled before I could stop myself. "Claire." Vincent's voice cut across the room like a blade through silk. Every conversation nearby immediately died. I looked up too quickly and found him standing near the dining room entrance already dressed for the dinner meeting. Black suit. Silver watch. Dark tie. Beautiful in the terrifying kind of way storms over the ocean are beautiful. His eyes dropped briefly to my phone still glowing in my hand. "You are leaving early?" he asked. "Yes, Mr. Moretti." "Why?" The question came too fast. Too sharp. I slipped my phone into my pocket carefully. I finished my work for the evening. That did not answer my question. The room had gone completely silent again. Staff members suddenly became very interested in polishing silverware nearby. I swallowed once before answering honestly. I have a date tonight. Vincent froze. Completely. Not dramatic. Not loud. But something in his face stopped moving altogether. Even the air in the room seemed to tighten. His jaw flexed once slowly while those pale gray eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my heartbeat stumble hard against my ribs. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Vincent spoke very quietly. You have a what? The strangest part was not that Vincent sounded angry. It was that he sounded hurt. The question hung in the air between us while 20 people inside the dining room suddenly discovered urgent reasons to avoid eye contact. I tightened my fingers around the tray in my hands. A date, I repeated carefully. With a man. Vincent stared at me like the second half of that sentence physically offended him. His jaw tightened once. Slowly. Deliberately. I understood the word. Then why ask again? Sophia made a choking sound somewhere behind me before pretending to cough into a napkin. I should have stopped talking. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to stop talking. But something about Vincent looking genuinely unsettled instead of terrifying made me reckless. His eyes moved over me briefly then returned to my face. You are leaving during dinner service. Everything is already prepared. That is not the point. Then what is the point? Silence again. Heavy enough to crush the room flat. Vincent took one slow step closer, expensive leather shoes barely making a sound against the marble floor. Up close, he smelled like cedarwood and rain and whatever impossible thing rich men always smell like. How long have you been planning this? He asked quietly. I blinked once. I did not realize I needed approval to have dinner with someone. You work in my home. I also have a life outside your home. Something dangerous flickered across his face then vanished before I could fully read it. Possessiveness maybe. Irritation. Something darker. His eyes dropped toward the silver necklace at my throat before lifting again. What kind of man is he? I almost laughed from sheer disbelief. Are you interviewing him now? Answer the question, Claire. He is an accountant. Vincent looked personally insulted by that information. An accountant. Yes. That is somehow worse. One of the kitchen staff accidentally dropped a spoon across the counter. The sound echoed through the silence like a gunshot. Vincent did not even glance away from me. You are seriously upset because I am going to dinner with an accountant? I am not upset. Mr. Moretti, you look one inconvenience away from declaring war on the Internal Revenue Service. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then unexpectedly, I watched his mouth twitch again like he was physically fighting a smile he did not want anyone seeing. The expression disappeared almost immediately, replaced once more by cold control. What time will you return? The question came too naturally. Too personally. Like he already expected an answer. Probably around 10. Too late. I crossed my arms carefully. I am 25 years old. New York after dark is not safe. I survived New York long before I met you. Something in his face changed at that sentence. Sharp. Quiet. Like he suddenly remembered there had been an entire version of my life that existed before this mansion. Before him. His voice lowered slightly. That does not mean I have to like it. My heartbeat stumbled hard enough that I hated myself a little for noticing. Nobody had ever sounded jealous over me before. Not like this. Not with this strange mix of irritation and restraint like he was trying not to say something worse. One of the security guards approached carefully from the hallway. Sir, Senator Reynolds just arrived. Vincent did not move. Did not blink. His eyes stayed fixed on mine another second longer before he finally stepped back. The room seemed to breathe again immediately. "Fine," he said coldly. "Go enjoy your date." I nodded once, suddenly aware of how fast my pulse was moving. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet." Before I could ask what that meant, he turned and disappeared toward the dining room while politicians and investors immediately surrounded him like nervous satellites orbiting something dangerous. But halfway through the doorway, Vincent stopped walking. Without turning around, he spoke quietly enough that only I heard it. "Claire." "Yes." "If he wastes your time, I will know." Then he walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of the kitchen with my heart beating far too hard for a man I absolutely should not have been thinking about. It should not have mattered that Vincent Moretti was jealous. Men like him did not belong in normal parts of life. They belonged in newspaper headlines and whispered conversations and expensive rooms filled with people too nervous to say the wrong thing. Not standing in kitchens asking what kind of man took their maid to dinner. And yet the entire drive downtown, I could still hear his voice in my head. What kind of man is he? Rain streaked across the taxi windows while Manhattan glowed gold and silver outside like something half beautiful and half dangerous. My phone buzzed twice before I answered Daniel's text. "Already here. Corner booth. Looking forward to finally meeting you. Normal. Sweet. Safe. Exactly what I should have wanted." The restaurant sat on the Upper West Side tucked between a bookstore and a jazz bar glowing blue beneath the rain. Warm lights spilled through the windows while soft piano music drifted through the entrance every time the door opened. The complete opposite of the Moretti mansion. No guards. No whispered conversations. No fear sitting underneath every silence. Daniel stood when he saw me walk in. Tall. Brown hair. Kind smile. Navy sweater instead of tailored suits worth more than my yearly salary. "Claire." "Hi." He looked relieved when I smiled back. "I was starting to think you changed your mind." "Long week." "You work too hard." If only he knew. We sat near the window while rain painted blurry streaks across the city outside. Daniel talked easily. Comfortably. About his accounting firm. His younger sister in Boston. His failed attempt at learning how to cook during quarantine. I laughed more in 40 minutes than I had all month inside that mansion. Real laughter too. Not careful. Not restrained. At one point he told a story about accidentally sending an office email with a cat filter still active during a conference call, and I laughed so hard wine nearly came out of my nose. "Okay," he said smiling, "that is officially the best reaction I have ever gotten. Because I desperately needed that mental image. You have a pretty laugh, by the way." Heat touched my cheeks slightly. Nobody had flirted with me in so long that I almost forgot what normal attention felt like. "Thank you." Outside, headlights slid through rain-slicked streets while jazz music hummed softly overhead. For the first time in months, I felt light. Like I had stepped outside some invisible cage without realizing how trapped I had become inside it. Then my phone buzzed. "Unknown number, are you enjoying yourself?" My stomach tightened instantly. I stared at the screen while cold realization crawled slowly down my spine. Daniel noticed my expression immediately. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Probably spam." But my heartbeat had already changed. I knew exactly who sent that message. Another text arrived before I could stop it. "Unknown number, the wine there is terrible. Order the bourbon instead." I looked up sharply toward the restaurant windows. Rain blurred the street outside into moving lights and shadows. Taxis. Umbrellas. Pedestrians rushing through the storm. Nothing unusual. And yet suddenly I could feel him somehow. Watching. "Claire." Daniel's voice pulled me back again. "Sorry," I said quietly. Just distracted. He studied me carefully for a second before smiling again. Well, for the record, I am having a really good time. I looked at him sitting there beneath warm restaurant lights with his easy smile and normal life and gentle eyes. He was exactly the kind of man a smart woman should choose. Stable. Safe. Kind. Then why did my chest tighten when my phone vibrated again? Unknown number, he is boring you. I should have ignored it. Instead, before common sense could stop me, I typed back under the table. Me, are you seriously spying on my date? 3 dots appeared immediately. Unknown number, I prefer the word protecting. I stared at the message while heat rushed unexpectedly into my face. Somewhere out in the rain, Vincent Moretti was watching my date like a dangerously jealous man trying very hard not to admit he cared. The problem with Vincent Moretti was that once you noticed him, everything else started feeling temporary. Daniel was sweet. He was funny. He held doors open and asked questions and listened to my answers like they mattered. Any sane woman would have chosen peace over chaos. But Peace had never once texted me from the shadows of Manhattan saying he was watching. I slipped my phone face down beside my wine glass and forced myself to focus on the conversation. So how long have you worked for this billionaire family? Daniel asked casually. Almost a year. That has to be intense. He laughed lightly. I cannot even imagine what rich people are like behind closed doors. My fingers tightened slightly around the stem of my glass. If only he knew. Mostly busy, I answered carefully. A lot of rules. You do not seem like someone who likes rules. I smiled faintly. You would be surprised what people get used to. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number, he keeps touching your hand. Heat crawled instantly up my neck. I grabbed the phone too quickly and typed back beneath the table. Me, this is insane behavior. Unknown number, yet you are still replying. I hated how fast my pulse reacted to those messages. Hated even more that somewhere out there Vincent was probably sitting inside a black SUV wearing that dark expensive suit while monitoring my date like a jealous king refusing to admit he cared. Daniel leaned back slightly, studying me with concern. Okay, now I know something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. Claire, you have checked your phone 6 times in 10 minutes. Work stuff. Your boss texting you at night? His tone stayed teasing at first but softened when he noticed my expression. That bad? I looked toward the rain outside the restaurant windows again. Traffic lights blurred red and gold against wet pavement while thunder rolled softly somewhere downtown. You ever meet someone who makes every room feel smaller when they walk into it? Daniel laughed. That sounds unhealthy. Probably. And terrifying. Definitely. Another vibration. Unknown number, he is trying too hard. I stared at the message in disbelief before typing back immediately. Me, are you reviewing my date like a restaurant critic? Unknown number, I could do better. My breath caught slightly. Just enough to annoy me. Daniel noticed anyway. There it is again, he said quietly. That look. What look? Like somebody else already has your attention. The words landed harder than they should have. I opened my mouth to deny it and realized I could not do it honestly. Because even sitting here in warm light beside a genuinely good man, part of me was painfully aware of another man somewhere outside in the rain. Watching. Waiting. Possessive enough to monitor the entire evening from a distance instead of simply admitting he did not want me here. Daniel gave me a small understanding smile that somehow made me feel worse. It is him, right? Who? The person texting you. Silence answered for me. He leaned back slowly and exhaled through a quiet laugh. Wow. It is complicated. No, he said gently. Actually, I think it is very simple. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Daniel, You smile every time your phone vibrates. I looked down at the screen still glowing beside my hand. Another message waited there already. Unknown number, come outside. My heartbeat stumbled so hard it physically hurt. Daniel followed my gaze toward the message I had not hidden fast enough. Then he smiled sadly and reached for his coat. You should probably go. I am sorry. Do not apologize. He stood and slipped some cash onto the table before looking back at me one last time. For what it is worth, whoever he is, Daniel shook his head softly. That man is completely gone for you. Rain hammered softly against the windows as he walked away, leaving me alone at the table with my racing heartbeat and a message from the most dangerous man I had ever met waiting on my phone. For a full minute, I stayed frozen in the restaurant booth staring at the words on my phone while rain blurred the city outside into silver streaks and broken light. Come outside. No explanation. No apology. Just a command written with the same quiet authority Vincent used for everything else in his life. My heart should not have reacted the way it did. But it did. Fast. Uneven. Dangerous. I grabbed my coat with trembling fingers and stepped outside into cold October rain. The air smelled like wet pavement and cigarette smoke drifting from the jazz bar next door. Yellow taxi lights slid across the street while pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas without noticing the black SUV parked across the avenue. The second I saw it, my stomach tightened. Of course he chose a black SUV. Because subtlety had clearly never interested Vincent Moretti. The rear passenger door opened slowly before I even crossed the street. He was inside waiting for me. Gray suit. Dark overcoat. One hand resting against the leather seat beside him while city lights reflected sharply across his watch. The inside of the vehicle smelled faintly like cedarwood and expensive whiskey. Warm. Quiet. Intimidating. Get in before you freeze, he said calmly. I should have walked away. Every rational thought in my brain begged me to walk away. Instead, I climbed inside. The door shut behind me with a heavy sound that immediately separated us from the noise of Manhattan outside. Vincent studied my face carefully for several seconds without speaking. You left early. You scared off my date. Incorrect. Vincent. He scared himself off. His voice remained smooth but something restless moved beneath it tonight. Something sharper than usual. I crossed my arms tightly. You followed me across Manhattan. Protected you. You monitored my dinner like a jealous psychopath. That word feels dramatic. I stared at him in disbelief while he calmly poured himself a glass of bourbon from the crystal decanter built into the SUV like this was somehow a normal human interaction. Do you always stalk your employees? Only the difficult ones. I am serious. So am I. Thunder rolled softly somewhere downtown while rain tapped against the tinted windows around us. Vincent finally looked directly at me again and suddenly the teasing edge vanished from his expression completely. Did he touch you? The question caught me so off guard I blinked twice. What? Your date. His jaw tightened once. Did he put his hands on you? He held my hand for about 4 seconds, Vincent. We were eating pasta. Not filming a scandal. The silence after that answer felt strangely dangerous. Vincent looked away toward the rain-streaked windows while his fingers tightened subtly around the bourbon glass. Then very quietly, almost under his breath, he muttered, I should not have allowed this. My heartbeat stumbled hard. Allowed? I repeated carefully. You do not own me. His eyes snapped back toward mine instantly. I know that. Do you? The words escaped before I could soften them. Vincent stared at me for several long seconds. While tension filled the entire SUV thick enough to choke on. Then suddenly headlights flashed brightly through the windshield as another dark vehicle slowed beside us. Marco's voice crackled through the driver's earpiece immediately. Sir. Every muscle in Vincent's body changed. Instantly. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by cold alertness sharp enough to cut glass. He lowered his bourbon slowly without looking away from the tinted window beside him. "That car has been behind us for 6 blocks, Marco said quietly. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? Vincent did not answer immediately. Outside, rain hammered harder against the city while the SUV beside us remained perfectly still at the red light. Then Vincent reached across the seat suddenly and wrapped his hand firmly around my wrist. Not painful. Protective. Possessive. His eyes locked onto mine with terrifying focus. "Claire," he said quietly, "I need you to stay calm." The moment Vincent touched my wrist, I understood something terrifying. Men like him did not panic often. Which meant whatever had just changed outside that SUV was serious enough to make a man feared by half of Manhattan stop pretending everything was under control. Rain crashed against the windows while the dark sedan beside us stayed motionless at the red light. I could barely make out silhouettes through the storm-dark glass. Vincent's thumb rested lightly against the inside of my wrist, steady and warm despite the tension radiating through his entire body. "Vincent," I whispered carefully, "what is happening?" His eyes never left the sedan outside. "Probably nothing." That is not a reassuring answer. It is the honest one. Marco's voice crackled again through the front seat. "Light is changing." Vincent nodded once toward the driver. "Take the bridge." The SUV moved immediately. The second traffic shifted green, gliding through wet Manhattan streets with unnatural smoothness while the sedan behind us followed 3 car lengths back. My pulse started climbing hard enough to hurt. "Why are they following us?" I asked quietly. Vincent finally looked at me then. Really looked at me. And for the first time since I met him, I saw something underneath all that perfect control. Fear. Not for himself. For me. Because somebody noticed you matter to me. The words hit harder than they should have. Before I could respond, the SUV turned sharply beneath an overpass while headlights flashed briefly behind us again. Marco muttered something low into his radio. The atmosphere inside the vehicle tightened instantly. Vincent shifted closer without seeming to realize he was doing it, placing himself partially between me and the window beside us like instinct had taken over. "You are safe," he said quietly. "Nothing is going to happen to you. You sound like you are trying to convince yourself." His jaw tightened slightly because he knew I was right. Outside, the city blurred past in streaks of silver rain and red brake lights while thunder rolled low over the skyline. Then suddenly the SUV accelerated harder. Not recklessly. Controlled. Precise. But enough to send adrenaline crashing through my chest anyway. The sedan behind us disappeared briefly around another corner. Marco spoke again. We lost visual. Vincent stayed silent another few seconds before finally exhaling slowly beside me. The hand around my wrist loosened but did not fully let go. "Was that normal?" I asked softly. "For my life." He gave a humorless smile. "Unfortunately." I looked at him sitting there beneath the dim amber lights inside the SUV. Perfect suit. Expensive watch. Calm expression slowly rebuilding itself piece by piece. But his hand still had not left my wrist completely. "This is why you followed me tonight," I realized quietly. Vincent looked away toward the rain outside. "Partly. You thought someone might come after me. I know how this world works." His voice lowered. "People look for weaknesses." Silence settled heavily between us. Suddenly every strange thing about the last few weeks made horrible sense. The security guards watching me more closely lately. Marco asking if I used the same routes home every day. Vincent texting me during my date like he physically could not tolerate losing sight of me. "I am your weakness." The question came out smaller than I intended. Vincent's eyes closed briefly. Like he hated hearing it spoken aloud. Then he answered with brutal honesty. Yes. My heartbeat stumbled so hard it almost hurt. Rain softened outside into a steady rhythm against the roof while Manhattan glowed faintly beyond the tinted windows. Vincent finally turned toward me fully again, and whatever walls usually lived behind his expression were suddenly gone. Do you know what happened to me when you said you had a date tonight? His voice dropped almost to a whisper. I sat through a $2 million dinner meeting and could not remember a single word anyone said. I stared at him speechless. He gave a short breathless laugh without humor. A senator asked me a direct question twice before I realized he was speaking to me. Vincent, I hated imagining another man making you laugh. The confession sounded almost angry at himself. And when you stopped answering your phone for 15 minutes, his fingers tightened unconsciously around mine again. Claire, I could not breathe properly. There are confessions that sound romantic. Soft words. Flowers. Candlelight. Vincent Moretti looked at me like confessing feelings felt closer to surrender. The SUV moved silently across the Manhattan Bridge while rain blurred the skyline into gold and smoke outside the windows. Inside, neither of us spoke for several seconds after his last sentence. I could not breathe properly. The word stayed suspended between us heavier than anything else he had ever said. Vincent finally released my wrist slowly, like he was forcing himself to let go. Then he leaned back against the leather seat and dragged one hand across his jaw with visible frustration. You should not matter this much, he muttered quietly. I stared at him. That is a terrible thing to say to someone after admitting feelings. I was not trying to sound charming. Clearly. A tired laugh escaped him unexpectedly. Real this time. Soft enough to make my chest ache. Outside, the rain finally began easing into mist while traffic lights reflected across the windshield in blurry ribbons of red and gold. Vincent looked exhausted suddenly. Not physically. Emotionally. Like this entire night had dragged something vulnerable out of him against his will. You know what the worst part is? He asked quietly. You are the only person around me who speaks honestly. My throat tightened slightly. That cannot possibly be true. Everyone else wants something. His eyes lifted toward mine again. Money. Protection. Influence. Fear. His voice lowered. You hand me towels when I am bleeding and argue with me about accountants. Despite everything, I laughed softly. He was actually very nice. Vincent looked personally offended again. Please stop defending him. You were spying on us. Monitoring. That word is not better. One corner of his mouth twitched faintly. The SUV slowed as the mansion gates finally appeared ahead through the mist and security lights. Massive iron gates opened immediately the second Vincent's vehicle approached. Home. Or at least the closest thing men like him probably allowed themselves to call home. But for the first time since I started working there, the mansion no longer felt cold to me. It felt dangerous in a completely different way now. Emotional instead of physical. The SUV stopped beneath the front entrance while rainwater shimmered across the stone driveway outside. Marco exited first, speaking quietly into an earpiece before disappearing toward the security office. Vincent stayed beside me another moment in the silence. Claire. Yes. He looked strangely uncertain for a man who controlled half the city. I do not know how to do this correctly. The honesty in his voice caught me completely off guard. Do what? Care about someone without trying to control every variable around them. My heartbeat softened painfully. Vincent glanced down briefly before continuing. The world I live in does not reward weakness. Caring about someone is not weakness. For men like me, it is. The sadness in that sentence settled deep inside my chest. Slowly, carefully, I reached across the seat and adjusted the sleeve of his coat where rainwater still clung faintly to the fabric. Such a small thing. But Vincent went completely still beneath my touch anyway. You know what I think? I asked softly. His eyes lifted to mine immediately. I think nobody ever taught you the difference between protecting someone and possessing them. Silence filled the SUV again. But this silence felt different from the others. Softer somehow. Vincent studied my face for so long that my pulse started moving too fast again. Then finally, very quietly, he asked, "And if I learn?" Rain tapped softly against the roof above us while distant thunder faded somewhere beyond the city skyline. I looked at the man beside me. The feared Mafia boss who terrified politicians, controlled entire rooms with a glance, and somehow looked more vulnerable admitting jealousy than anything else. Then maybe, I whispered carefully, you stop trying to keep me. His breathing slowed slightly as he held my gaze. And what happens instead? I smiled faintly despite the chaos he caused in my life. Maybe I choose to stay. Vincent froze again. Not from anger this time. Not from jealousy. Something softer. Something almost disbelieving. Outside, Manhattan glittered beyond the mansion gates while rain drifted quietly across the sleeping city. And for the first time since I met Vincent Moretti, the most powerful man in the room looked at me like power no longer mattered at all.